Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. What true crime case haunts you? The fact that Larry Murphy is walking around free makes my blood run cold, and that of any women who are aware of who he is. He is a convicted rapist and prime suspect in the disappearance of a number of young women in the 90s, including an American visitor, Annie McCarrick, the first to go missing. While he was in prison for the rape, the disappearances stopped. In 2001, he kidnapped a woman, locked her in the trunk of his car and drove to a secondary location where he repeatedly raped and beat her. He put her back in the trunk of his car and drove to an isolated area in the mountains where he again repeatedly raped her and beat her. He was in the process of attempting to murder her when two hunters, by the grace of the heavens, happened upon them. They recognized him as he lived in the locality. He ran off and they took the woman to safety and reported it to the police. Larry Murphy was arrested and pleaded guilty to rape and attempted murder. He served a paltry 10 years in prison. He showed no remorse for his crime. While in prison, he refused to engage with rehabilitation programs, and when he was released, he was just as dangerous as the day he was arrested. In the 90s, Ireland was rocked by the disappearance of a number of young women, 8 in total, all within a similar geographical area, and all within Larry Murphy's reach. All of these disappearances have been thoroughly investigated, but no trace of the women have ever been found. Larry Murphy has been ruled out as a suspect in just one of these disappearances, and the other 7 remain unsolved. It is widely believed that they met the fate that he intended that woman to meet in 2001, the one the hunter saved. It's suspected their bodies are buried in the Dublin, Wicklow Mountains, but it's a vast area, it's wild terrain, and nothing has turned up yet. The disappearances stopped while he was in prison. When he was released from prison, he was hunted by the media and he couldn't settle anywhere in Ireland, so he moved on to mainland Europe. He has lived in Spain, France and the Netherlands. Irish police work with the police in these countries so they know who he is. He's been spotted trying to chat up young women in bars and visiting prostitutes. The police keep him under surveillance. Last known location was in the south of Spain, where he was working as a carpenter under an alias. It just runs my blood cold. Delphi murders. It seems impossible that no one knows the murderer. Toy box killer. So messed up. The horror that must have been going through his victims' minds freaks me out. Hope he's rotting in hell. The boy in the box. On February 25, 1957, the body of a 4 to 6-year-old boy was found stuffed in a bassinet box and dumped in the Fox Chase section of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The child's body was recently washed, covered in bruises and lacerations, and his hair was recently cut. He was naked, wrapped in a tattered plaid blanket, and clumps of the recently cut hair was still clinging to his upper torso, blanket and the box in which he was found. The child had surgical scars along his groin and ankle, as well as an L-shaped scar on his chin. He was malnourished and showed signs of significant abuse prior to death. He was originally located by John Stachowiak, a man illegally trapping muskrats. John did not report the discovery, fearing police would confiscate his traps. Several days later, college student Frank Guthrum discovered the child's body and reported it to authorities. Police took the child's fingerprints, however they yielded no match. Over 270 police cadets combed the crime scene and found potential clues in a child's scarf, a man's blue corduroy hat, and a man's white handkerchief with the letter G on it. However, these clues did not lead to new information in the case. Investigators believe the child may have been the unwanted child of the unwed stepdaughter of a man that ran a local foster home. Blankets similar to the one found with the child, as well as a bassinet matching the one from the box he was found in, were located in the foster home. However, no further evidence was collected and no charges were pursued. In February of 2002, a woman named Martha or M came forward stating the child was purchased by her abusive mother from his birth parents in the summer of 1954. During the next 2 years, her mother allegedly physically and sexually assaulted the child until one evening at dinner when he vomited his meal, which contained baked beans. M's mother dragged the child to the bathroom where she beat him and slammed his head into the floor before drowning him in a cold bath. She cut his hair, stuffed him in a box and disposed of the body. The details of Martha's story match details that were not released to the public, including that the child's stomach contents contained beans and he had water in cold hands, as well as several noted injuries in specific locations on the child's body. Despite this, Martha was not taken seriously and dismissed as she allegedly had a history of mental illness. Neighbors of Martha's mother declined ever seeing a boy at the household, and the tip was officially discredited. Other theories were investigated but subsequently also dismissed. In 2016, a facial reconstruction of the child was created and released but yielded no leads. In 2017, DNA from the child was tested against a man from Memphis but was unfortunately not a match. The boy in the box was originally buried in Potter's Field. However, after his exhumation in 1998 for DNA extraction, he was reburied in Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedarbrook, Philadelphia. His headstone reads "America's Unknown Child." City residents regularly place stuffed animals and flowers at his grave. It's been nearly 64 years since the boy in the box was discovered. Who is he? Who killed him? Could Martha have been correct about his identity? Will America's unknown child ever get his name back? My sister was murdered in 1984 and it's a cold case now. The most likely hypothesis was that she was killed because she was threatening to sue a dentist with ties to organized crime. He botched an oral surgery on her, and tried to pay her off not to report him, but she refused. The police said a suspected hitman flew into town the day before she was killed and left afterwards, but there was no evidence left. She was stabbed 5 times in the torso after returning home to her apartment from work. Several $100s in cash were in plain view on the dining table, a loan she was giving her husband's cousin, and nothing was missing. I'll probably never know who did it, and the killer could be dead by now, as this happened in 1984. The real thing that scares me is the amount of serial killers uncaught is larger than you would expect. Killing of Renee Har, developed by Issei Sagawa. That man not only raped his victim, but ate her and kept her body parts in the fridge. He had multiple cases and his psychopathic thoughts absolutely haunt me. Hard to believe he was only declared sane and found that perversion was his sole motivation for murder. He's currently living a long life at 71 years old. There wasn't much punishment for him. He just wrote books about his murders. The Andrea Yates case. Just the mental image of those poor children trying to get away as she was drowning their siblings. Also, the image of her husband keeping her constantly pregnant despite knowing she had mental health issues. He was quoted at one point as saying that he wanted to have more children with her after she was treated and released. If you haven't read it, the book Are You There Alone is absolutely heartbreaking. The Casey Anthony case. It amazes that they left a whole murderer scot-free. All the evidence is there. It's not really scary, but it's more disgusting how she wasn't guilty for the murder of her baby. I should agree. Any theory that remotely makes sense either still leaves a lot unexplained or calls for a lot of assumptions to be taken as facts. The Otaku Killer. The way he lured those small girls and killed them makes my blood boil. Thank God he was put on death row. For context, he was a child rapist and he would kill the children, strip them bare and take photos. Afterwards he would have intercourse with their dead bodies for days on end before they began to rot. He would amputate their legs and arms too as trophies. He was caught trying to lure another young girl. He got photos, but another girl saw and told her father. Her father beat the SHT out of the creep, and he called the cops. The Rat Man, one of his other nicknames because of his hands, tried to run but the police were at his car. He was arrested and his face was shown to the world. The murder of James Bolger. It's the most horrifying and tragic case to me and pulls my emotions asunder whenever I think about it, or hear updates about the killers. I will never be able to forget that little boy. The JonBenet Ramsey mystery. I recently watched a documentary on the entire case and it still baffles me that there were so many clues, but it was never really solved. The unresolved case of my rape as a 6-year-old. Sylvia Likens. It just made no sense to me the lengths that woman, and her family, went to harm and degrade her until her death. It disturbed me for days after reading about it for the first time. The murder and dismemberment of my dear, sweet, unforgettable friend Ashley Young by piece of SHT Jared Chance, made worse by the fact that his parents helped him cover it up. Joseph DeAngelo, the Golden State Killer. The way he would stalk his victims for weeks and sneak in and out of their house without anyone knowing and hide weapons around the victim's house and his victims had no idea. It just freaks me out to no end. Glad he was finally caught, but it took way too long. He took and ruined so many lives and then got to live the vast majority of his outside of prison. I'm not religious, but I hope hell exists for effing garbage like him. And I hope he has a long, Miserable life of rotting in jail. The case of Junko Furata. Kaylee Anthony, that poor little baby. Casey Anthony still makes me sick. Shonda Scherer, it haunts me that she had to suffer hours and hours being beaten with a tire iron after being stabbed multiple times, then dying in one of the worst ways when her body was burnt. All that because she liked a girl another girl liked. Elise Lam. I don't subscribe to the theory that she was murdered, or was killed by a ghost or whatever. I think she had a psychotic episode. The idea that you can just lose your mind like that scares me. That your brain can create its own internal matrix, and fabricate a strange, frightening reality. As cliché as it may sound, making a murderer. The part that scares the most is that it seems like cops can just make up a case against you and you're going away for life. Israel Keys. He would set up a murder kit ahead of time, sometimes years in advance, and then when he went back, would find a home that provided the opportunity. He murdered a couple in my tiny state of Vermont, and their bodies were never found. Bone-chilling. Jack the Ripper. I was really interested in history as a kid, got a book from the library's history section about the case without knowing anything about it. Why my parents or the librarian let a child check that book out, I have no clue. It had pictures, lots of them. The image of Mary Kelly is forever burned into my retinas. It gave me nightmares for years. Still horrified by it today. How about all the harassment, missing, and murders that happens in the military? Vanessa Guillen was a recent victim and one of the sergeant was harassing her. She stated that to her mom before they killed her. She's not the first and won't be the last. The Villisca axe murders. 2 adults and 6 children bludgeoned to death while they slept, but there's more. There's a theory with some pretty solid evidence that the person that did it was actually responsible for a lot of murders in the US, and even in Germany. They talk about it on the My Favorite Murder podcast, episode 60, 21 minutes in. Worth a listen if you're interested in true crime. The Black Dahlia murder. The crime scene is so graphic I can't believe a human could do something so evil. D.B. Cooper is endlessly fascinating to me. Karina Holmer's murder in the fens of Boston. They only found her upper torso. No crime scene. She was murdered in 1996. No suspects. No leads. Nothing. The Matthew Hoffman case. Not the actor. For those who don't know, Hoffman was responsible for the deaths of Stephanie Sprang, Tina Maynard, and Tina's son Cody in November of 2010. After breaking into their house and stabbing them to death, he dismembered them, put them into garbage bags, and stuffed them inside a hollow birch tree. He also abducted and sexually assaulted Tina's daughter, Sarah Maynard, keeping her imprisoned in his basement for 4 days. Hoffman had a minor criminal history and mostly kept to himself. When police identified him as a potential suspect and entered his home, nearly every surface was absolutely covered with leaves. There were leaves piled roughly 3 feet deep on the floor. Bags of leaves stacked against almost every wall. Sarah was kept on a makeshift bed of leaves in the basement. What sticks with me about the case is Matthew's attitude toward everything. He said he experienced psychosis episodes and one would assume psychopathy based on his attitude toward his victims. But he loved trees. He begged law enforcement not to cut down the tree he had stowed the bodies in. He just always loved trees. It's odd to see one show no empathy for human life or dignity, including one's own, and yet. Trees? I dunno. He haunts me a lot. Sword and Scale has an amazing episode on this case if you want to know more. Not necessarily the case that FCKs me up the most, but I haven't seen John List mentioned here and I think about that one a lot. The guy murdered his whole family, his wife, his kids, his elderly mom. And then started a new life. Which he lived. For decades, he remarried and had a normal life where no one suspected anything at all, and he was only caught because America's Most Wanted showed a forensic model that some neighbors recognized as him. Imagine your co-worker or neighbor or second husband secretly did something like that. The case that FCKs me up the most is the toy box killer. I have a super specific phobia of something like that happening to me, so when I heard that someone not only did it but the victims often were drugged to the point of amnesia, I freaked out like, what if I just don't remember that happening? In my neighborhood someone has a bomb. I wasn't there at the time but I lived just a few doors away from the house it was in. Creeps me out every time I walk past it. Also, the bomb didn't go off. The Dnipropetrovsk maniacs. Two absolute psychopathic teenagers just went on a murder spree over the course of a week and killed over 20 people. They also tortured animals for fun. If you Google them, the first image you see is of them taking a selfie in front of a cat that they hung. They're most famous for being the guys behind the 3 Guys 1 Hammer video. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.